I'm so happy to connect with you today and talk about fairy tales. I have been thinking and talking about AI a lot lately, but it's very nice to talk about something else, especially such a wonderful subject as fairy tales, which I think doesn't get enough attention nowadays.
Thank you, Christina. I'm happy to be here and talking with you about fairy tales. Christina, you often say that many classic fairy tales have lost their original magic in retellings. What does that mean, and how do your kind-hearted fairy tales bring that magic back?
Well, that's a good question. I think, first of all, maybe we should talk about magic. What is magic? When people think about magic, they think about some superpowers that can affect somehow people, animals, events, nature. We live in the world with magic and we don't realize it. There's so many magical things around us, and the world is magical. Our actual world is magical. There's so much unknown. There's so many powers that we cannot even explain, right? I'm thinking we live on Earth, and 70% of Earth is covered with ocean. And we don't even know, we didn't explore even probably 80% of the ocean. So we don't know if there are any forms of life or creatures living in the ocean. Caves, for example, right? Same thing, undiscovered territory. So there's so much we don't know about our world that a lot of things are actually magical, unexplainable to us. Maybe there are parallel universes, different dimensions that we're not seeing with our eyes. Sometimes you think even animals can see things we don't see, right? Sometimes you look at your cat and they're looking somewhere like, what are they seeing? I'm wondering. I feel like our capabilities are so limited. And in the future, if our technology gets better, especially now with AI, maybe we will have those abilities to see some things that we didn't know about, things that we don't understand now. There's so much magic everywhere in the real world, and in fairy tales, it should feel magical.
So you're talking about things that are like undiscovered. So you want to bring to children things that maybe they haven't discovered yet.
I'm saying that in fairy tales, the fairy tale world is magical. The whole world is magical. Yes, undiscovered. There are some powers that can affect people, animals, nature. And the same thing is happening in the real world. A lot of things are unexplainable. A lot of things seem magical, right? And the difference, I think the question was about the difference between old fairy tales and new fairy tales. And I think it depends on how far back you want to look at the fairy tales, like really old fairy tales. Brother Grimm fairy tales, for example, they're very dark. And Brothers Grimm, they didn't write those fairy tales. They didn't come up with those stories. They're not original fairy tales. They're not literary fairy tales. They collected those fairy tales because long time ago people would just tell the stories. It was a culture of storytelling. They didn't have TVs. They didn't have many ways of entertainment. So they would sit down in the evening, have candlelight and tell those stories. And they were very similar but different in different cultures and different countries in the world. So those original fairy tales, for example, Brother Grimm's fairy tales, they were very dark. For example, their version of Cinderella was very cruel version. For example, sisters in that version, then they were trying on the glass slipper. One sister cut off her toe to fit into the slipper. Another one, her heel. The idea of those old fairy tales was to scare children so they can listen. Don't go to that forest, animals will eat you, right? But they can be also relevant to today's world, right? Don't go to the internet. There are predators there. Be careful. We just need to be able to see that connection and apply those lessons, right? But as time went by, fairy tales became so sweet and so light. We went from that darkness to completely Hollywood style entertainment, just fun, light, not very deep. Is there magic? Yes, but it doesn't feel magical. It doesn't feel that everything's there is magical. This is how I see it.
Yeah. Speaking of what we have available content today, parents, for parents, there's a lot of content that, they try to, sort of like look for their children, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, um, children's movies, games, books. Why do you think that we need these fairy tales like yours in this mix?
Well, I think it's definitely a difficult task for parents to find good content for their children. We have so much information, so many books, videos, computer games. There are too many choices. Choices are good, but then there are too many choices. It makes things complicated, right? People don't really have time to go through all this information to find that little golden nugget, right, for their children. And it's not only about children, just for all of us. We're overwhelmed with the amount of information we're getting nowadays. Our brains are not even designed to process that much information that we're being exposed to. So for parents, it's definitely a difficult task to find good content. We're always happy when our children read, right? But we need to make sure what are they reading. There's so many books to choose from. So I think that it's difficult, and even for good books to be found. If you go to Amazon or any other bookstore, there's so many options, and decisions are usually made for you, right? There's an algorithm working behind the scene, and you maybe not you won't be able to find that wonderful book. So I think it's wonderful to be able to talk about books that can benefit children more on podcasts and any other way that you can share some information about good books. I think for parents, just talking to each other and share this information. We bought this book. It's just amazing. It's wonderful. Has great lesson. My kid loved it. I think this is one of the problems that we have. A lot of content is very entertaining, like to keep kids happy. Sometimes it's a little bit foolish, even too much. So we don't have that many books that are a little bit deeper, a little bit more meaningful. Everything feels like surface level. And when my children were little, I remember it was difficult to find good books. So then you find the good book, it's wonderful. And it's important to share your knowledge. If you found a good book for your child, let other parents know. And I think the second part of your question was about my kind hearted fairy tales. Why would the parent choose my book? Again, maybe going back to fairy tales subject that we just discussed, that older fairy tales were more dark and cruel. Uh, Maybe they were good for that time frame, right? Maybe they were good. Maybe that's what they needed. But for us now, we need something. We need more kindness in the world. There's so much negativity everywhere. So I think kindness is important. And if we can send those kind hearted messages through books, I think it's wonderful.
So you do call your series of these books kind-hearted fairy tales. So why did you choose that name? And And how does that kindness come alive in your stories?
Old fairy tales used fear for obedience. So they were trying to scare a child so the child would listen. This new fairy tales should be kindness for guidance. So you can teach the same lesson as they were teaching long time ago without fear. Even though fear is not always bad, we have, as humans, we have fear for protection, right? So it's a good thing, but it's not a good thing to use as a teaching tool, right? You don't want children to be afraid. This is not how you learn a lesson. So with my kind-hearted fairy tales, my characters are learning many, many different lessons along their journeys. And they're kind-hearted characters, but they're not perfect. I think this is one of the things that I see in these new fairy tales, that the main character is just perfect. So it teaches the lesson you have to be perfect to be lovable, to be good. But we are not perfect. The humans are not perfect. And it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to learn along the way and get better. So, for example, in my fairy tale, Prince Alexander and his mustachioed adventures, the character is not perfect. He makes mistakes, he's learning, he's growing. There are many lessons in my books that are about kindness, because I believe that we don't have enough kindness in the world. And if we read books about kindness, I think it's kind of good reminder for all of us, not only for children, but for adults too, that kindness is important, because we have this vision about kindness that it's some weakness, that if you're kind, you can't stand for what is right, but it's not true. If you're kind, you're too soft. No, you're strong. You can be strong and be kind. You can fight for your rights and still be kind. You can solve difficult problems and deal with complex situations, but be kind.
So you talked a little bit earlier about your characters, and that they're not that they're not perfect. And so what makes your characters unique, and memorable compared to the ones that children may already know, like from traditional fairy tales or popular media?
Yeah, I think that's something I already touched on, the fact that they are not perfect. I think here in the US, we love happy endings. We love then everything will be fine. And it's good, right? It's a good message. Everything will be fine in the end. And it's very specific to our country. In different countries, you would read fairy tales and they would not end like happily ever after. Even old fairy tales, not every one of them would have a happy ending. My fairy tales do have happy endings, but still, I feel like they have to be a little bit more realistic,
Yeah.
so people can connect, so they can see themselves. Because if you look at those modern fairy tales characters, how perfect, how sweet, how pretty, how wonderful they are, it's not always easy to connect. So I have to be that good to become a hero, right? To be lovable. No, we all have flaws, and it's fine.
Yeah.
There's some messages in my fairy tales that you wouldn't be able to find in other fairy tales, because my fairy tales are original. So in my second book, there's a message about importance of healthy lifestyle, that you need to move, that you need to eat healthy, That's something you probably wouldn't be able to find in some old fairy tales because it wasn't even relevant at that time, right? This is not the message they would teach children long time ago. Now we have this problem when the food is unhealthy. The food choices we have, they're just overwhelmingly bad. You know, kids don't play outside as much as they used to, run around just playing outside, riding their bikes a lot. uh, and even before bikes, just playing outside, climbing the trees. Now it's different. Children spend a lot of time on their devices, they're not active. So my fairy tales are written in this traditional fairy tale language where you have princesses and princes, but at the same time, they're modern day messages that are relevant to today's children, to today's environment we're living in.
Mm-hmm. So I know you were born in Russia and raised in Ukraine, and then you moved to the US in 2003. How do your cultural roots show up in your writing?
I can say that I was born in this fairyland. The place where I was born is just absolutely beautiful. I was born in Siberia. It's south of Siberia, next to the Sayan Mountains and the beautiful river. It's called Yenisei. Right next to my house, there was taiga. So a lot of pine trees. So everything around me was just beautiful, beautiful forest, beautiful river, beautiful mountains. The winter was like 6 months long. You have snow, so beautiful snow everywhere. So I feel like first 9 years of my life, I was living in this fairy tale land. So I think it somehow affected me. That's why probably I feel good when I go to Tahoe. I feel like, oh, that feels so good to me. That's why I dream about the log house in Tahoe because it just reminds me this first 9 years of my life living and beautiful waterfalls. I just love waterfalls. So yeah, the environment, first of all, it was so magical. It felt like a fairy tale. It was very, very nice. And when I grew up, I read fairy tales as well. It was even Cinderella. We have our own version. It's called Zolushka. It's not as like fun and like Hollywood style interpretation, but it's not as dark as Grimm's tales, for example. So I think first of all, the environment had that trigger, that everything around me looked like a fairy tale. And then reading fairy tales when I was a child, I felt like you step into this magical world. If you read my fairy tales, you would probably see that they're somehow different, but I don't know. Let the readers decide.
I know your fairy tales are original, but I presume there must have been Russian fairy tales, and were those kind of a lot of the fairy tales you read when you were growing up?
Yeah, there were many fairy tales, and we had cartoons based on those fairy tales. And definitely, every country has their own fairy tales and retellings, subvertive fairy tales of those traditional fairy tales. Andersen's fairy tales, Grimm's fairy tales, Charles Perrault. Yeah. And many of those old fairy tales are still relevant.
So I didn't know this, but an interesting to find out that some of the famous fairy tale authors like Brothers Grimm, you've spoke about that, you've referenced that a little bit. Um, today, and also Hans Christian Andersen. They also had backgrounds in law, just like you do. Do you think that there's like a hidden connection somewhere between law and storytelling?
Yeah, that's interesting. Then I was writing my kind-hearted fairy tales long time ago. Those two books I wrote in 2012, 13. I think they were published in 2014. So it's been a while. And the third fairy tale is coming soon. It's ready for publishing, and I'm working on the fourth one. So it's a series of kind-hearted fairy tales. So then I was researching fairy tales long time ago. I found out that actually many fairy tale writers have law degree. So I thought it was very interesting, and there's definitely some connection. Uh, One of them, I think it's something about justice, because lawyers, usually people become lawyers and work in the legal field even if they're not lawyers, but people who are trained as attorneys, as lawyers, they believe in justice. And I think that fairy tales are all about justice. you
Mm.
know they show this is bad, this is good, and this is what's going to happen if you're acting as a bad person. If you're doing something good, you will be rewarded. If you're doing something bad, you will pay for it. There are going to be some negative consequences. So I think there is a connection between law and fairy tales. This is one thing. Another thing, storytelling. Yes, for lawyers, generally speaking, there's a lot of storytelling and understanding people, why they're acting certain way and what are the consequences of that. And another point I wanted to make is the fact that in the legal field, every word matters. Every word matters. So the way people write in the legal field, they're very careful about how they phrase things, how they express their idea. And then in fairy tales, it's the same thing. If you read any fairy tale, every word, every sentence is there for a reason. There's always some meaning behind it. In fact, I was watching a video of Jordan Peterson analyzing a fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel. It's like every sentence he read, there's a psychological analysis can be attached to it. So there's a lot of symbolism, there's a lot of meaning behind each word.
So then it kind of seems like, can you like talk a little bit about, sort of that, how it's structured, fairy tales are structured. And could you just kind of share a glimpse into your own creative process, and how does an idea become a fairy tale?
Mm, how the idea becomes a fairy tale. That generally speaking, I think that people don't have ideas. And I don't remember who said that, but I believe somebody said this already, that people don't have ideas, ideas have people. I believe that there's shared consciousness, and ideas find us when we're ready. It actually just comes from somewhere, from some supernatural event. I don't know, but I actually heard it many times, and others would say that they just knew their story right away. It just came to them, maybe in the dream, maybe when they woke up in the morning. They just knew the story from beginning to the end. And then of course the next step would be hard work to write it.
Mhm.
Actually, express all those ideas and make it make sense to other people. So then I wrote my first fairy tale. I just wanted to write a fairy tale for my daughter. And it was more like a storytelling. I told her the story that I came up with, and she said, Mom, you should write a book so other children can read it. And I thought, oh, that's a wonderful idea. But then I thought, how do you write a fairy tale? So I started to um, research this subject. I went to the library, I read a lot about fairy tales. There are people that dedicated their lives to fairy tales, researching fairy tales. There are specific rules on how to write fairy tale. So I had the idea right away and the story was there, but then you have to write it so it actually follows the rules of fairy tale telling. So that took some time, and then I traveled to Ukraine and I published my fairy tale in Russian language in my hometown in Nikolaev in Ukraine. So that was wonderful. An amazing team at the publishing house Ilion worked on this beautiful book, and it just absolutely beautiful. But before that, I have to go back and mention that I spent 2 months working with an amazing illustrator. Her name is Helen Chernova. She's from St. Petersburg, Russia. And I wanted my fairy tale looked like an old fairy tale. So it's pencil. You see, then you open the book, the pictures are very, very beautiful. It's kind of like old style, fairy tale style. So I worked with the illustrator for 2 months to illustrate the book. And then I traveled to Ukraine and it was published and it got the best children's book award in Nikolaev region. So that was amazing, a big win for everybody who worked on this book. Publishing house Ilion. There are so many amazing people, an editor, and here in the US. Then I wanted to publish my book. I did self-publish it here in the US. I had another wonderful editor, Linda J, who was helping me with editing. So it's quite a journey, and it's not only about writing a book, but actually creating a book, uh, working on illustrations and putting it all together. It took so many people, their hearts, and their time. Each and every one of us have this limited time in our lives, and if people dedicate their time to help you to make your dream come true. It was my dream to have this book published for my children to read and then for all other children to read, and hopefully someday my grandchildren to read, and more kids hopefully will get access to my books, hopefully. But like you said, there's so many books out there that it's hard to find and hard to be found.
Mm-hmm. So looking ahead, I know you mentioned that you have a third book on the way, and then also starting to work on a fourth book. What bigger dream do you have for your stories in the years to come?
The third book is my favorite one. I don't know if you can have the favorite one. I love each and every one of them. But the third one that will be published very soon, it's the most magical one. um, Amazing book. I love it so much. And I can't wait to share it with the world. So that would be the next step. And I started working with the company that will help me to create audiobooks. I think it's wonderful to be able to listen to stories in the car, for example. If you're on the road trip with your family, it's not good when they sit on their devices, and I see it everywhere all the time, just sitting in the car and listening to a wonderful, kind-hearted story. I think it's a great choice for parents and their children. So I'm excited about creating audiobooks for all three of my fairy tales. So that is something that I look forward to, and hopefully it will come out soon. I'll definitely announce it when it's ready. But it takes a lot of people, a lot of talented people to bring story alive.
So I know you often ask your own podcast guests this question. So let me turn it back to you and ask you, what does kindness mean to you?
I do ask almost all my guests about kindness, and I have a special playlist on my YouTube channel where people can go and watch these short videos where people talk about kindness. And I love it. This is wonderful. To me, I was very lucky growing up with my parents who are both very kind. My mom is, I feel like, the kindest person on earth. She has such a good heart. She's so kind, she's so sweet, she's so caring. And my dad has he's an amazing dad, and he has a very good heart and very kind and caring. So to me, kindness is caring. Like right now, you took your time to ask me questions and talk about fairy tales. It's very kind of you to do this, to take your time from your busy schedule to talk to your friend about something that matters to me. I think this is a good example of kindness. How about you? What does kindness mean to you?
Well, I think kindness is something that it's something, I think, that it's not just something that you do. I feel like it's something that you are. You know, it's yes, you have acts of kindness, and you do things to help people. You want to make sure that you're kind to people, but I also believe that kindness is something that you live by. It's something that's you, that's who you are, as a representation of you in this just aura about yourself. So
Yeah,
there.
that's wonderful. It's hard to disagree with that. It's who you are, just a kind person. And somehow we feel those people, right? We feel that this person is kind, that they have this special energy. And there are many, many kind people in the world. And I think sometimes people reflect and think, am I a kind person? Or maybe I should think, yes, I am, but I have to take some action to, put it to work, to show my kindness to people around me and to the world. Maybe inherently, deep down inside, everyone is kind, right?